everybody, it's jrobi. We've had a huge day at Chess Candidates 2014. We're going to be taking a look at three games today. We've had three victors coming out of day two. And the first game we're going to take a look at quickly here is Kramnik versus Karakin. And Kramnik just went to town here, played a beautiful game against Karakin. So let's just dive right into it here. So Kramnik's white. We get into a queen's gambit accepted. And play continues. Pretty standard moves. Kramnik's going for the center, pushes the pawn up here to e5 to kick that knight around a little bit, and from here comes in with the bishop, takes that pawn now on c4, and has built a very strong center right in the beginning of the game. Knight peels back to b6. Kramnik pulls the bishop out of danger to d3, and from here now knights develop now to c6. Kramnik brings the bishop out to e3, and knight comes down to b4, attacking the light square bishop. Kramnik wants to preserve that bishop, slips it into e4, and just take a look at this position. I thought this was pretty interesting. You don't see this crop up very often. Those two knights look a little bit out of place. Like obviously the one on b6 is okay. It's a pretty active square for the one on b4, not really defended by anything though. But Kramnik's center is just, it's looking beautiful. From here now, black tries to get back into the center, pushes the pawn up now to f5. Instead of capturing or retreating the bishop, Kramnik pushes the pawn up here to a3, attacking the knight sitting on b4. Black captures, white captures, and now we have double pawns on both sides of the board. A little bit more dangerous for black here because the double pawns are in the center of the board along the e file, so the d and f files are open, exposing the king, which is not yet castled. From here now, black pushes the pawn up now to e6. Black's got some things it needs to accomplish, obviously, namely that bishop on f8 needs to be brought into the game. So a little bit of development here needs to be done. White develops the knight now to c3. Black brings the bishop down to pin that knight to the king, and white now plays the check with queen to h5. Check is blocked with the pawn. Queen retreats now to g4. So it's eyeballing up this pawn on e6. And in fact, you're going to see Kramnik take advantage of these pawns in the center of the board all throughout the game, exploiting the fact that they're very weak pawns. They can't be protected by any of the black pawns anymore, so full pieces have to be dedicated to protecting them. Black takes the knight here on c3. White recaptures. White's got a nice little pawn island now in the center of the board to work with for the rest of the game. Black brings a queen up now to d5, defending this pawn on e4. So once again, we see a piece having to defend a pawn. White continues with development, knight to e2. Black does the same. White castles, and instead of castling in this position, black brings the queen down now to c4. So the queen here on g4, obviously it's eyeing up this pawn here on e6. It's also eyeing up the pawn on e4, and it's also defending the knight here on e2, although there's no immediate threat to the knight, obviously. But with this bishop sitting here on d7, that can be brought into the attack at some point. But black's always got to be careful of these pawns that don't have any defenders. So white brings the knight now to g3, gets it out of the queen's line of attack. Bishop comes down now to c6, defending this pawn here on e4, giving another defender to the pawn because white now has two attackers on that pawn, and the queen is still eyeballing the defense of the e6 pawn. So it's quite a lot of positional jockeying here around these doubled up pawns here. White lifts the rook now to a5, bringing the rook into the position. I thought that this was a really great move, and you'll see here in a second why. Black castles. Look at that, rook over to c5, attacking the queen. What's that queen doing? Well, the queen's defending this pawn on e6. Obviously, that's lined up for check if white were to take it. So where's the queen going to go to continue to do that? Well, black tries moving over to b3. From here, white plays pawn up now to c4, severing the connection of that queen to that pawn. And now black is getting into some trouble here. Black moves the king off to b8. White takes that pawn now on e6. Black swings the rook over to e8, attacking the queen. Queen peels back, and black tries to get a little bit more active in the position, plays knight over to c4, attacking the dark square bishop on e3. Kramnik sacks the rook in this position. Look at that, eh? Just sacks the rook. He's going to open up the king side, or open up the queen side actually, and get things even more open for him. Obviously, white's got a better center. White has, just sacked the exchange, obviously, but we can get a lot of attacks going on here. Plus, we still have this weak pawn here on e4. Black recaptures. White now comes in, snags up that pawn on e4, and black brings the knight back now to b6 to help with the defense of the king. White jockeys the knight up here to c5. Nice little active post for this knight. This is going to be a pivotal piece in the end of the game here. Queen comes up to d5. White swings a rook over to c1 to give another line of attacker down on this side of the board, as well as give some extra support to the pieces. And the bishop's defending the rook here on c1 as well. Black takes the king off, moves it to a8. White moves the knight now up to a6, and this is a very active position for this knight. Obviously, we're hemming the black king in a little bit here, but look at all the opportunities that this knight has to attack. It's attacking the pawn here on c7. It can do a lot in this position. From here, the king tries to kick that knight out. Knight does retreat now to b4, but lines up two attackers now to the pawn sitting on c6. So once again, taking advantage of the fact that black has pawns that can't be defended by pawns, and full pieces have to be brought into the action to defend that. Queen goes over now to f7. White queen comes up to g4. Knight comes down here for black to d5, attacking the knight here on b4, also eyeballing up the bishop here on e3. White simply takes a pawn now on c6, so another pawn has dropped. Black brings a rook down. Knight goes over with check. King tucks into a8. And look at that move. Queen to e4, pinning that knight down against the king. Obviously, black has to do something about that. Needs more defenders on that knight. Black decides to bring the rook over now to b6, closing up the b file, giving access to the queen to defend the knight. But white's got a nice little couple of moves here. White plays pawn up first to g4. Black pushes pawn to h5 attacking, and white simply brings the rook up now to c5. So now we have two attackers on that knight. The only really good move to defend, rook over to d8, giving that knight another defender. But can you guess what's coming? Take a look at the board. Knight c6, attacking the rook. So black's pretty much has to take this knight with the rook, at which point its rook falls, so it's down the exchange. The material here is pretty close to even, materialistically speaking. Kramnick's up a pawn, but take a look at the position. We've got these awesome central pawns. Great piece coordination from white leading towards the enemy king. It's big trouble for black here. Black captures the pawn on g4. White doesn't take back immediately. Brings a rook over now to f6, attacking the queen. Obviously, this knight is still pinned, can't contribute. Queen has to peel back, goes to h7. Dark square bishop comes up to g5. Obviously, it's going to be eyeballing up this rook in the future. Queen goes back to g8, defending the knight here on d5. Black takes the pawn now on g6, because of course to the attacking dark square bishop here on the rook. And at this point, the game is over. So Kramnik actually did a very, very good job. I kind of wish I could go into it in a lot more detail. Maybe I will in one of the middle game videos in the future. But I thought that work with keeping the pressure on those double pawns. They were isolated. They had no defenders. Black had to develop pieces, full pieces to defend those pawns all throughout the game. So Kramnik, crushing victory, 1 full point. And let's go on to the next game. All right, the next game we have Svidler versus Andreen. And Svidler was playing the white pieces here. And this is a beautiful, beautiful game on a really good way to use your knights. So let's get started here. Let me get this ready. All right, so white opens up with e4. And we get into an old Sicilian defense here, actually, which you don't see a terrible amount of at top level play. But apparently recently at the top levels it's been gaining popularity. So just some standard moves here in the beginning. Obviously black is wanting to protect that pawn on d6. We got two defenders on it. Also getting ready to develop some more black pieces. White thrusts the pawn up now to c4. d5, obviously a nice pivot square. Black develops. White brings the knight up now to c3, and black kicks the white knight down now to a3. So this knight on a3 is looking a little grim on the rim here. Black continues now, bishop to e6, continuing development, putting pieces into the center to attack towards the center of the board. White brings the bishop up now to e2. Black brings the dark square bishop down now to g5, attacking the dark square bishop on c1. White just ignores that and focuses on improving the position of the piece here of the knight that was sitting on a3. Black captures, white recaptures, and now black brings the queen to an active square on g5. From here, white just castles, and black plays rook now to d8. Now you might be wondering, if we go back a move there, why not try something like bishop to h3 here? Well, it just helps white develop its pieces quicker, because after knight to e3, there is no threat in this position, and white just has a better central position of the board. So that wasn't played. That is why rook d8 was played instead. From here, white thrusts the pawn up now to d4. Black brings the knight up to f6, and white continues on with development now. Fully developed queen up to d3. Black castles, and now white brings the rook over to d1. So the rook and the queen are bearing down on the d file. Black brings the rook to c8. White now jumps that knight up now to that beautiful, beautiful square d5. Take a look at all the access points for this knight. Black thrusts the pawn up to b5. White doesn't even capture, brings the queen over now to g3. Black says, okay, let's do the queen trade. Queens come off the board, but before the queen's recaptured, white uses that nice knight. Takes the knight on f6 with check. Black recaptures. Now we got double pawns in the black position. Now white captures that queen. Also opens up the h file in the process. And from here, black takes the pawn now on c4. And interestingly enough, white does not take the pawn right away. Instead, continues on with the attack. Thrusts the pawn up to f4. Black pushes the pawn to f5 in response. White captures. Black recaptures. Bishop comes to f5, eyeballing the knight here on c2. And white actually does not take the pawn back right away either. Instead, swings the knight up now to e3, attacking the bishop on f5. From here, black makes a positional mistake, brings the bishop down now to d3. Obviously, this is going to cause a lot of problems for the black position. White happily takes that bishop off. Black recaptures, and take a look at all the the pieces that are weak here in the black position. We've got the pawn on d6 here, no defenders obviously. We've got the pawn on d3. We got this knight on e3 ready to pounce into the action to a variety of great squares in the position. And that's exactly what white plays. White knight to f5. Take a look at all the access points for this knight. Just beautiful, beautiful access points. Black responds by pushing the pawn up now to e4. And we're going to actually get into a very, very interesting position here as the game progresses. White captures the pawn on d6. Black pushes the pawn up now on e3. And take a look at this structure that's forming here. Like, I mean, that's got to be a little bit nervous, but it actually works out quite well for white. White takes the rook now on c8. Black continues thrusting the pawns forward. Pushes the pawn to d2, attacking the rook on c1. What does white do? Well, white just takes the knight on c6. From here, black pushes the pawn up now to e2. And, for amateur players like myself, this would be a moment of panic. But in this position, Mr. Svidler knew exactly what to do. He just brought the rook back down to c1, saying, go ahead, take something. Black does, promotes to a rook. White rook recaptures. Now this pawn on d2 is blockaded. Obviously can't progress. Black takes the rook now, takes the knight now on c8. And now white takes a pawn on d2. And then from here, black brings the rook down, trying to threaten taking the pawn here on g3. Mr. Svidler found a really nice move in this position, just rook up now to d5. And obviously this pawn cannot be recaptured. If it is captured, white just swings over, hits the check, and white will have double pawns. It'll have two nice, beautiful connected pawns here on this side of the board. Black king will be tied up busy over here, and it was pretty much game over at this point. So it was a really good game. I especially like the knight moves throughout the game. And I'm just going to go back to move 22 here, where this mistake was made positionally. An alternative option would have been to play the bishop to e4. Engine analysis likes this. It's not quite a, it's not the greatest position for black. White obviously still has a lot of pieces coordinated in this position, attacking into the center of the board, but it's just a better move for black that would have probably led to something along these lines, which is still quite playable for black. All right, so that was the Svidler and Andreen game, and let's go on to the last one now, Aronian. I talked about Aronian in yesterday's video. The assassin and Anne took care of him yesterday. Today was a very important day for him, so let's get to that game now. All right, the last game we're going to take a look at Aronian versus Mamadov, and this was a really entertaining game. I can only imagine what Aronian was feeling like yesterday after day one, to be the only player to come out of the first day of competition without any points whatsoever. Must have put a lot of pressure on him. He is a favored player in this competition, so he had to come back big today, and he did. He came up with a beautiful tactical strike here. So he's playing white. We're getting into kind of an interesting opening system here. We're just going to flip through the first few moves. Black comes up, pins the knight on c3. White replies and pins the knight here on f6. Black continues development. White captures into the center, taking on d5. Black recaptures. Now knight brings the knight back to d2. Black pushes the pawn up now to c6, and white pushes the pawn up to e3. So we've got a very symmetrical looking pawn structure on both sides of the board. From here, black brings the knight to f8. Kind of a strange looking move, but that knight is going to get rerouted here to g6, which will be a better square for it. White develops bishop now to d3. Black brings that knight out. White castles and black castles. So we're getting close to the tactical shot here. So from here, white pushes the pawn up now to f4. Black decides to kick that bishop out. Bishop, instead of retreating, well, actually the bishop couldn't retreat there, just captures the knight here on f6. Black recaptures with the queen, and now white pushes the pawn up now to f5. Black's pretty much got to move that knight off. Moves the knight to e7, giving another attacker here to the pawn on f5. And this is the tactical shot actually right here. So go ahead and pause the video if you want. Take a look, see what you would play in this position. But Aronian found a nice little move in this position. And it was knight to e4. So it's attacking the queen. Queen's got to be saved, obviously. It's basically sacrificing the knight for this line that's going to result here. So, pause the video again, see if you can figure out the sequence of moves that's going to take place. But basically, the pawn captures knight. Knight recaptures, attacking the queen again. The queen has very few options in this position. The engine's just like it taking the pawn on f5. But Mamadov tries to save the queen. Queen to h4. From this point now, pawn attack on the queen, g3, attacking the queen. Queen retreats to h3, which is basically the only option that it has. And from here, knight attacks queen on f2. And the queen has absolutely nowhere to go, so the queen comes off the table. Now, this position here, obviously white is winning. It's not super easy. In fact, Aronian said that to complete the game, it took a lot of maneuvering and a lot of careful play still, even though that the opponent's queen was off the table. However, Aronian, very strong chess player, didn't take terribly long to capitalize on the fact that his opponent's queen was gone, and he could enjoy the rest of the game with his queen still on the table. But there still was a lot of moves left in the game. We're not going to go through them. It's just basically a very nice, slow, positional crush after the queen came off the table. And Aronian was able to redeem himself on day 2 of the Candidates Chess 2014. So take care. Thanks for watching the videos, and we will see you next time.